I stood in the kitchen, staring at the kettle as the steam curled up into the air. It was one of those quiet evenings, just the sound of the city outside, distant and muffled, mixing with the low hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't sure what it was about tonight, but something in the stillness made me feel more introspective than usual. Maybe it was the exhaustion from work, or maybe it was just the feeling of being caught in the monotony of life. I wasn't sure anymore. But all I knew was that I needed a moment. A moment to breathe. James was upstairs, probably wrapped in his own world, watching TV or catching up on emails. He liked the quiet, too, maybe too much. I couldn't remember the last time we sat down and talked about anything other than the day-to-day. We hadn't really shared a meaningful conversation in weeks. I knew it wasn't just me feeling distant, but admitting that out loud seemed impossible. So, I just kept it to myself. I poured the hot water into my mug, the tea bags sinking into the liquid, the color slowly spreading through the clear water. My hands were trembling slightly, not from the heat of the cup but from something else. Something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. I sat down at the small table by the window and stared out into the night. The city lights flickered below, like tiny fireflies dancing in the darkness. There was a strange beauty in the chaos, a sense of being both lost and found in a place so big, so full of people yet somehow so empty. It reminded me of how I had felt for the past few months, lost. But in the quiet, it also felt like maybe I could find myself again. As I sipped the tea, my mind drifted. I thought about before. Before James and I had built our life together. Before we were bound by bills, by work, by the unspoken expectations that had slowly crept into our relationship. Before we stopped looking at each other the way we used to, like we couldn't imagine life without the other. Before I was married, before I had to become someone I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. I missed that version of myself, the carefree girl who would laugh at the smallest things, who didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders all the time. I remembered my ex, Aaron. He wasn't the one I thought I'd end up with, but he made me feel alive in a way that James never seemed to. Aaron had a way of making everything feel like an adventure, like life wasn't just about getting through the day, but about enjoying the moments in between. With him, I felt seen, heard, like I was more than just a wife, more than just a partner. I felt like I was important. That wasn't to say James didn't care for me, but over the years, something had shifted. The spark we once had, the deep connection that made everything feel so easy, had slowly dimmed. I don't even know when it happened, when we stopped laughing as much, when our inside jokes turned into polite conversations, when the silence became the loudest part of our relationship. Maybe it had happened little by little, and I just hadn't noticed it until now. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I missed how my ex made me feel, how he made me feel like I mattered, like my thoughts and feelings were important. That wasn't something I had felt in a long time with James. It wasn't even about wanting to go back to Aaron or wishing things had turned out differently with him. It was more about wanting that feeling of being understood, of being truly loved for who I was. I didn't even realize I had whispered it aloud until I heard the words leave my mouth. I miss how my ex made me feel. The words were barely above a murmur, soft, like a secret I was sharing with the empty kitchen. A fleeting thought that I didn't mean to speak out loud. I sat frozen, suddenly aware that I wasn't alone. James had entered the kitchen without me hearing him. He stood in the doorway, his face hardening as he processed what I had said. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned to face him, but the words that followed weren't anything I was prepared to hear. James stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on me, his expression unreadable at first. The moment seemed to stretch, the air thick with an unspoken tension. I didn't know what to say. I felt the panic rising in my chest, realizing the weight of my words. I had never meant for him to hear that. It was a fleeting thought, a moment of vulnerability, and now it felt like a betrayal. My heart pounded in my ears as I watched him take a slow step forward, his hands clenched by his sides. Samantha, James, I. I didn't mean it like that. I wasn't talking about him, I was just thinking, that's all. I was lost in my own head. It's not about Aaron, not really. I tried to reach for him, but he stepped back, distancing himself. His voice was low, controlled, but there was a cold edge to it that sent a chill down my spine. James, so you miss him? After everything, you still wish you were with him? The words felt like a punch. I hadn't expected him to react this way. I knew it wasn't right to say those things, but I never thought it would push him to this point. His eyes darkened, and I could see the hurt starting to form in the way he looked at me. He took another step back, his jaw tight, and it was like I was suddenly speaking to a stranger. Samantha, James, it's not about him. It's about me. It's about how I feel right now, about how I've felt for a while. I don't want to hurt you. His eyes flashed with something darker, frustration, anger, betrayal. I could see it building inside him, like a storm that was about to break. I didn't know how to stop it. He was furious, and I was paralyzed by guilt. I had no idea what to say to make him understand. I just needed him to hear me, to know that it wasn't about Aaron, or even about the past. It was about me feeling lost, disconnected, and unsure of who I had become. James, how could you say that? How could you even think about him like that? After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for us? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the raw pain that I had caused him, and it made my heart ache. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that it wasn't about comparing him to Aaron, that it wasn't about him not being enough. But how could I explain something I didn't even fully understand myself? James, you think about him, don't you? You think about the past, about how things were easier back then. About how he made you feel special, right? The accusations stung, but there was a truth in his words that I couldn't deny. There had been a time when I felt seen, heard, and cherished, something I had been craving for so long. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't about wanting to go back to that it was about the lack of feeling that had settled between us over the years. But I couldn't. Not now. Not with the anger in his eyes. Samantha, no, James. It's not about Aaron. It's about the way I've been feeling. I miss feeling like I mattered, like I wasn't just a role in a routine. But it's not your fault, and it's not about wanting someone else. James didn't say anything for a long moment. His eyes burned into mine, and the silence between us was unbearable. The tension was so thick it felt like it could suffocate me. And then, without another word, he turned away, his shoulders rigid, his movements sharp. I watched helplessly as he walked toward the door. James, I can't do this right now. I need space. The door slammed behind him, the sound reverberating through the house like a final blow. I stood there, frozen, the weight of the argument sinking in. I had said the wrong thing. I had opened a door that I couldn't close, and now I was left standing alone in the aftermath of my words. I felt the tears welling up, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. I needed to figure this out, to find a way to fix what I had broken. But part of me wondered if it was already too late. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. The silence was suffocating. James had been gone for hours, and I had no idea where he went. I hadn't tried calling him, I knew he wouldn't answer. He had made that clear, walking out without a word. I didn't know if he needed space or if he was angry enough to never come back. Either way, I was left alone in the void we had created. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. The television was on, but the noise felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The world outside was carrying on, but inside, I was stuck, frozen in this moment of regret and guilt. I thought about what I had said, and how quickly everything had fallen apart. I had spoken from a place of hurt, a place of longing for something I didn't know how to ask for. But I never meant for it to push him away. I never thought it would cause this much damage. I tried to focus on the mundane, the way the light shifted through the curtains, the soft hum of the fridge. Anything to distract myself from the whirlwind of emotions crashing inside me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his hurt expression, the way he looked at me like I had betrayed him. And with that vision came the overwhelming guilt. I wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in this relationship, in this life we had built. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what I was looking for. And now, I had pushed him away. The door creaked open, and I snapped my head up, hoping it was James. But it wasn't. It was just the wind, making the door rattle. I felt my chest tighten. The silence felt louder now, more oppressive. My mind raced as I thought about what had gone wrong, how we had gotten to this point. I thought about Aaron, about how he had made me feel special when no one else seemed to. I had never wanted to go back to him, I knew that. But I couldn't deny the longing I had for that connection, for someone who truly saw me. And I hated myself for it. The thoughts seemed to spiral, each one darker than the last. What if this was it? What if the damage was irreversible? James had never been the type to walk out over small things. He was quiet, reserved, but when he was angry, he stayed in the room. He fought, he argued, but he never left. And now he was gone. I had no idea if it was the last time I would see him, or if this was just another phase, a temporary rift that would fade once the storm passed. But I couldn't be sure. And that uncertainty gnawed at me. Hours passed, and the house grew colder. I wrapped a blanket around myself, hugging it tightly as if it could protect me from the pain. I thought about calling my friends, but I didn't know what to say. What could I tell them? That I had ruined everything? That I had broken my marriage with a careless whisper? No, I couldn't tell them. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face their questions, their judgment. I wasn't ready to admit that I had been the one to cause all this. I stood up, pacing the living room. I knew I had to fix this, to apologize, to explain myself. But I didn't know how to make him understand. How could I explain something so deeply personal, something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I tell him that it wasn't about Aaron, or about comparing him to anyone? How could I tell him that it wasn't about longing for the past, but about the fear of losing myself in the present? The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging on forever. I tried calling James again, but the phone went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't know what to say anymore. I felt so far from him, so disconnected, and I wasn't sure if he could ever look at me the same way again. It was then that I realized something important. This wasn't just about what I had said. It wasn't even about Aaron. It was about us, about the distance we had created over time. It was about the fact that we had stopped truly seeing each other, stopped connecting in a way that made us feel like partners, not just roommates. And now, I was left to confront the truth that I had allowed it to get this far. The realization hit me like a wave, and for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe again, though the weight of it all was still heavy. It wasn't too late. Not yet. The night passed slowly, the minutes dragging on like hours. I could barely sleep, tossing and turning in the emptiness of our bed. James hadn't come home. I hadn't heard from him. My phone stayed silent, no texts, no calls. I had spent the entire night replaying the argument over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how many times I went over it, I couldn't change what had happened. My words were out there, hanging in the air like an invisible barrier between us. By the time morning came, the sun was barely rising, casting a soft, pale light through the window. I got out of bed and moved slowly through the house, every step feeling like a weight pressing down on me. I wanted to make it right. I needed to fix this, but I didn't know where to start. I stood in the kitchen for a while, staring at the coffee maker, my hands trembling as I tried to prepare something as simple as a cup of coffee. The act itself felt meaningless, like it didn't matter anymore. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I found myself wondering if this was it. If I had pushed him too far, if my words had broken something that couldn't be fixed. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him, but a part of me was also terrified of the truth. Maybe I wasn't the same person I had been when we first got together. Maybe neither of us was the person we needed to be for the other anymore. I tried calling James again, but the phone rang and then went to voicemail. Again. I pressed my lips together in frustration, staring at the screen. I didn't want to leave a message, but I knew I had no other choice. Samantha, James, please. I know I hurt you. I didn't mean to. I miss the way things used to be. I miss feeling seen, feeling like we were truly connected. But I'm here, and I'm ready to fix this. Please come home. We need to talk. I hung up, my hands still shaking as I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. I didn't know if that would make any difference. Maybe he needed more time. Maybe he would never pick up the phone again. The uncertainty was unbearable, gnawing at my insides. But I couldn't just sit here and wait. I had to do something. I decided to drive. I needed space, clarity, some time to think. Maybe being out of the house, away from the overwhelming silence, would help me clear my head. I grabbed my purse, stepped into my car, and drove aimlessly. The road seemed endless, and for a while, I just let my mind wander. I thought about my relationship with James, the good, the bad, the moments that had brought us together, and the small cracks that had started to form in the foundation. I thought about Aaron and how he had made me feel, but more than that, I thought about how long it had been since I had felt truly seen by anyone, even by myself. I missed that connection, the one that I thought I would find again with James. But somewhere along the way, it had gotten lost. I drove for what felt like hours, the road stretching out before me, the weight of everything pressing down. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, what I expected to find. But as I neared the outskirts of town, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it quickly, not daring to hope it was James, but when I saw his name on the screen, my heart stopped. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I answered. Samantha, James? There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But then his voice came through, soft and distant. James, I'm here. I'm at the park. Come meet me. Relief washed over me like a wave, but there was still a knot of fear in my stomach. I couldn't imagine what he was thinking, how he was feeling. But I knew this was it. This was the moment when everything would either fall apart or start to heal. I didn't say another word. I just hung up, started the car again, and drove to the park. My hands were still shaking, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again, no matter what happened next. But I was willing to face it, to face him, to face whatever truth we had to confront together. When I arrived, I spotted him immediately. He was sitting on a bench, his head lowered, his shoulders tense. He didn't look up as I approached, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he would even acknowledge my presence. But I stood there, just a few feet away, waiting for him to speak. Waiting for him to decide what came next. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes red, his expression unreadable. James, you really miss him, don't you? I shook my head quickly, stepping closer. Samantha, no, James, I don't miss him. I miss us. I miss the person I used to be. I miss the way you looked at me. I miss the connection we had before everything changed. He looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or pain, it was something softer, something closer to understanding. James, then let's try to find it again. Together. And in that moment, I knew that maybe, just maybe, we still had a chance. We stood there for a few moments, neither of us speaking, just letting the weight of everything hang in the air between us. The silence was no longer suffocating, but instead, it felt like an unspoken understanding had formed between us. James looked at me, his eyes still heavy with the pain of the night before, but there was something different in them now, something I hadn't seen in a long time. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, as if releasing the tension he'd been holding for hours. His gaze softened, and I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. The kind of hope that was fragile, but real. "James, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about everything. And I know I've been distant, too. I've been so focused on just getting through the day that I've forgotten to look at you, to really see you. And I'm sorry for that." I felt a lump form in my throat. The words I had been craving to hear, the words that felt like a lifeline, were finally coming from him. I had never realized how much I needed to hear them until now. "Samantha, I never wanted to hurt you, James. I stopped myself, unsure how to continue. How could I explain everything? How could I put into words the years of silence, the frustration, the longing? I wasn't sure if I could, but I had to try. "Samantha, I just got lost somewhere along the way. I thought that maybe if I could find that connection again, if I could feel something like I used to, maybe things would be okay. But I didn't realize that what I was looking for was always here. It was always with you. And I let it slip away without even realizing it." He reached out then, gently taking my hands in his touch warm and grounding. His voice was soft, but there was a steady strength in it. "James, I understand now. I know I haven't been perfect either. I've been so caught up in everything else, I didn't stop to see what was right in front of me. I didn't see you, the way I should have. But I'm here now, Sam. I'm ready to work on this. To work on us." A wave of relief washed over me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the tight grip of anxiety loosen. We had been stuck, caught in a cycle of misunderstanding and silence, but now, we were finally talking. Really talking. "Samantha, I'm scared, James. I'm scared that we're too broken to fix. That we've drifted too far apart." He gave me a reassuring smile, the kind that made my heart beat a little faster. "James, we're not broken, Sam. We're just lost. But we can find our way back. We just have to be willing to try, to fight for each other, and not just for the life we thought we had. I'm ready to fight if you are." I nodded, my throat tight, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. I had been afraid for so long, afraid of facing the reality of where we were, of what we had become. But now, standing here with him, I realized that maybe we could rebuild. Maybe it wasn't too late for us to reconnect, to find the love we had lost. Maybe, just maybe, we could start over. "James, I want to be the man you need, Sam. The man I know I can be for you. We've both made mistakes, but I believe in us. I believe in you." His words wrapped around me like a warm embrace, and I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt seen. I felt heard. "Samantha, I believe in us too, James. And I don't want to lose you. I want to fight for us, for the life we can still have together." James smiled, and this time, it was different. It wasn't just a smile. It was the smile I remembered, the one that made me fall in love with him. The one that told me everything would be okay, as long as we faced it together. "James, then we'll do it. Together." We stood there, in the early morning light, holding hands, knowing that we had a long road ahead of us. But for the first time in a long time, we were no longer afraid of it. The road might be difficult, but it was ours to walk, together. And that was enough. As we walked back to the car, side by side, I felt a weight lift off my chest. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know exactly where our journey would take us. But for the first time in a long time, I believed we could make it. And that was a good start. We drove home in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a peaceful silence, one filled with the quiet understanding that we were going to be okay. That we were going to make it work. And for the first time in so long, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. Subscribe to our channel for powerful real stories that touch your heart. Join a community where emotions run deep and every story brings a new perspective. Don't miss out, hit that bell for weekly updates.